All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another edition, if you will, to Pastor's Perspective. My name is Dr. Andy Woods, and I'm here with my friend and colleague and fellow elder, Dr. Jim McGowan. So, Jim, welcome back.
It's great to be here again.
And gosh, I think this is our, if I'm counting correctly, this is our sixth time perhaps doing this, fifth or sixth.
Feels like it.
Feels like it, something to that extent. And, we were doing a study the last time we were together on the whole subject of ministry philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I told folks that we were going to continue that. But the problem is I looked at my calendar and I discovered that given the fact that our office is closed for the next 2 Fridays, this is really the last chance we have to do a Christmas type of show. And so since it's the holiday season and Christmas time, we didn't want to let the Christmas time frame escape us without focusing on the birth of Christ. So, whatever we're going to talk about related to pastoral ministries, philosophy, and paradigm shifts that are happening, we'll get back to that at the beginning of the new year. But for now, we're dealing with the whole subject of Christmas. And one of the things that's very interesting to me about the Bible, Jim, is that the birth of Christ, which we're all getting ready to celebrate, coming up pretty quick here, December 25th, the birth of Christ is actually laid out in terms of a script hundreds and thousands of years before it happened.
Amen.
And to the best of my knowledge, Jesus Christ is the only human being that's ever walked the face of the earth whose life is laid out like that in terms of a script.
Right.
I mean, when you read the Quran, for example, you don't have any in-depth prophecies like this. And this is one of the things that makes the Bible special and makes it unique, is its capacity to predict things before they happen. Yeah. And so when we talk about Christmas, this is usually where my thoughts go, to these Christmas prophecies. Just to show us the significance of Messianic prophecy, kind of to set the table, can you read Galatians 4 and verse 4?
I would love to. This is coming out of the New American Standard Version, 95 update, and we're reading Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law.
So that's a great Christmas verse.
Yes.
It says, God sent his Son into the world when the fullness of time came.
Yes.
So you kind of get the impression that the stage was set.
Yes. And
the stage was set when you study it, and one of the ways God set the stage is by revealing the birth of Christ before it happened. And Jesus held the religious leaders of his day accountable for understanding the prophecies about him. Can you read Matthew 16 and verses 1 through 3?
Sure, glad to. Matthew 16, 1 through 3 says this: The Pharisees and Sadducees came up, and testing Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. But he replied to them, When it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times?
So red sky in the morning, sailor take warning, right? So he basically says you know how to figure out when it's going to rain, when it's going to be a storm. Why is it that you can interpret physical signs about the weather, but you can't interpret the spiritual signs? Yes. Here I am, your Messiah, standing right in your midst, and you're not even going to recognize me. Yeah. So you get the impression that there were many signs given before he showed up on the earth that they should have been attuned to.
Yes. Particularly
since they were God's chosen people and they had the light of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So in that vein, what I'd like to go over with the listeners today, and if you have questions and comments, we're going to be getting to those a little bit down the road, so please put them there on our, there should be a little place on the Facebook page to do that. But I want to just share and talk through today 4 Old Testament prophecies written hundreds and in some cases thousands of years in advance about the birth of Jesus Christ. Now 4 is a lot. There are probably about 109 verses total that reveal the life of Christ in advance. Some about his death, some about his resurrection. And we're just focused on a handful of them related to his birth, since that's what we're getting ready to celebrate. And, you know, think of the improbability of 109 verses coming to pass in a single human being. That would be an astronomical number. Yes. And in fact, there was a statistician named Peter Stoner, and he demonstrates the probability of just 8 prophecies coming to pass in one person. Just 8, let alone not 109, just 8. And can you read what he says there? It's very interesting.
This is amazing, actually. It says here, Dr. Peter Stoner published a book called Science Speaks. Dr. Stoner was the chairman of the departments of mathematics and astronomy at Pasadena City College until 1953, when he became chairman of the science division at Westmont College. In other words, he was a capable mathematician. And in Science Speaks, Dr. Stoner calculated the probability that any one man could fulfill just these 8 prophecies to be a chance of 1 in 10 to the 17th power, meaning a 1 with 17 zeros after it. To illustrate how unlikely a chance that would be, Stoner gave this illustration. Cover the entire state of Texas with silver dollars to a level of 2 feet deep. The total number of silver dollars needed would be 10 to the 17th power. Now, choose just 1 silver dollar, mark it, and put it back. Then thoroughly stir all the silver dollars all over the state. Now, blindfold someone and tell them that they can travel wherever they want in Texas, but sometime they must pick one of the silver dollars. The chance of finding that 1 silver dollar that we marked in a pile 2 feet deep covering the state of Texas would be the chance the prophets had for these 8 prophecies coming true in any one man in the future.
It's astounding, isn't it?
Wow.
And here we are in Texas, you know, broadcasting this. I was raised in California, but I got to the promised land as fast as I could.
Some people think there are silver dollars everywhere in Texas.
Right. But think of, you know, mixing this whole state 2 feet deep with silver dollars, just randomly identifying 1 silver dollar with an X on it. Blindfolding somebody and then letting them grab the exact silver dollar. That's statistically the chance of just 8. We're not even talking about the 109.
Wow.
8 prophecies coming to pass in one person. And, you know, I come from a legal background, as you know, and I'm not the kind of person that can believe something just because people tell me it's true. I need proof. And I'm so grateful that in Christianity, in the Bible, God has built in certain proofs like this to His Word, which, you know, make us feel that we're not just taking a leap into the dark, but our faith is founded actually on factual evidence.
It's not blind faith.
It's not blind faith at all. The Quran or any other alleged holy book offers nothing like this.
Amen.
So let's take our time here and let's just look at 4 prophecies. And the listeners may want to follow along with us in their Bible that speak to the birth of Jesus, which is what we're getting ready to celebrate here, coming up pretty quick. So the first one is in the book of Genesis, chapter 3 and verse 15. This is right after the fall that takes place in the Garden of Eden. And God puts His messianic, He begins to showcase His messianic program in terms of His plan of redemption. And He makes a prophecy there that we call the proto-evangelium, which simply means first gospel. It's the first proclamation of the gospel in the entire Bible. So can you read that to us? Genesis 3 and verse 15?
Sure. Genesis 3:15. God is speaking, He says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel."
See, there's coming one from the seed of the woman being Eve. who's going to ultimately crush the devil, the serpent being the devil. The serpent is identified as the devil in Revelation 12, verse 9, and Revelation 20 and verse 2. But ultimately, there's coming one from the seed of the woman that's going to crush the devil's head. And when you go over to Genesis 4 and verse 1, we're very sure that this is a messianic prophecy because of something that Eve, who received this prophecy, says. You want to read Genesis 4 and verse 1?
Yes, Genesis 4:1. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain, and she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord.
Now, in the New American Standard Bible, what people will notice is with the help of is in italics. Which, what does that mean?
It means it's not there in the text.
It's not there in the original
text.
It's
added there for cultural clarity, if you will.
So the translators kind of put that in. And usually the translators are very helpful.
Yes.
But sometimes they obscure the meaning.
That's
and
right.
here's a case where I think the meaning is obscured.
Yes.
Because if you were to take the words with the help of out, which we can do because they're not in the original, what it says is, I have begotten a man, the Lord. She felt that she, by giving birth to her firstborn, Cain, had given birth to the Messiah. Talk about parental disappointment. She didn't give birth to the Messiah. She gave birth to the world's first murderer. But she had an expectation that a Messiah was coming from her seed.
Yes.
And she obviously got that expectation because of what was spoken
Yes.
there in Genesis 3, verse 15, which I take it she was right there to hear.
Obviously she understood that.
She understood it in a messianic sense. And this tradition is passed down the lineage, and you get to a man named Lamech, who is Noah's father. And notice what he says a few generations later in Genesis 5 and verse 29.
All right, Genesis 5:29. Noah's father is speaking. He says, Now he called his name Noah, saying, This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed.
So Noah is born, and Lamech, his father, said, This one is going to give us rest from the curse. Meaning that Lamech, like Eve, mistakenly thought that Noah was going to be the one who was going to ameliorate the curse. The word curse, you don't find that anywhere else prior to this point in time, other than Genesis 3:17, which comes right after Genesis 3:15. So there's a messianic understanding amongst these early human beings that a Messiah is coming. And I think this is the meaning of Daniel 11:37, which is commonly misunderstood. Can you read that?
Sure. Daniel 11:37. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all.
Now let's talk about the Antichrist. And he will show no regard for the desire of women. And I hear preachers go on and on about how the Antichrist is going to be a homosexual or something. But that's not the point. The desire of women was this Jewish desire to be the one to give birth to the Messiah.
That's a good point.
Which is something that starts all the way back in the Garden of Eden. It was a desire that Eve had. Now, the part of it that's very interesting, let's go back to Genesis 3:15. And this is where it relates to the birth of Christ. It says in Genesis 3, verse 15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed, now that's Satan's lineage, and her seed. Now the sperm or the seed comes from the man,
Right.
does it not? So the sperm donor, as we might say, is always the male. This is a very strange phrase because it says not his seed, but her seed.
Was God confused here?
I don't think God was confused. I think he's revealing something.
I do too.
That the seed that she's going to be carrying won't be normally implanted in her by a male. And so that, I think, is your first description of the virgin birth of Jesus Christ.
I would agree.
The Messiah must be virgin born. Because, if the Messiah wasn't virgin born, he would have had the same sin nature as the rest of us.
Right.
And he couldn't have qualified to be our perfect sacrifice. And a very fine book that we're going to quote from a little bit here is a book by Arnold Fruchtenbaum, a Hebrew Christian scholar. I would encourage folks to get this book. It's a fairly easy read. It's called Messianic Christology, and he makes some statements there about her seed. Can you read that quote to us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. This is from Messianic Christology, page 14 and pages 36 and 37. And Arnold Fruchtenbaum says, the fact that Moses traced this genealogy through the woman tells us that there will be something very different about the Messiah, something that necessitates tracing his ancestry through his mother, not his father. Moses gives no explanation here, and none will be given for several centuries until the time of the prophet Isaiah, when he will prophesy in chapter 7 that Messiah is to be born of a virgin and have no human father. Contrary to the biblical norm, the Messiah would be reckoned after the seed of the woman. Why? Because he would have no human father. His would be a virgin conception and birth.
See, we celebrate the virgin birth of Christ, but I think it starts getting hinted at very early on in the biblical story, Genesis 3, verse 15.
Yes.
And of course, it's the strategy of God that the Messiah had to be virgin born, or else the Messiah would have had a creation point. That can't be, because the Messiah is the second member of the Godhead who has always existed. And or else the Messiah would have had a sin nature, which can't be, because only a perfect sacrifice can take away our sins.
Yes.
So there's the whole doctrine of the virgin birth, starts right there in Genesis 3, verse 15. Yes. So that's just one of 4 prophecies, and that's exciting, isn't it?
It is. It's awesome.
Let's take a look at a second one. Let's go over to the book of Numbers, chapter 24 and verse 17. And as folks are turning there, on all of our Christmas cards, we have these men coming from the east following a star. We know that part of the story.
Yes.
And that comes from Matthew 2, 1 and 2. Would you mind reading those verses to us?
Sure. Matthew 2, 1 and 2 says, Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him.
So they're coming from the east. Now, biblically, where is the east always in the Bible? See, a lot of prophecy teachers misidentify the king of the east as China. But when you actually study how the biblical text uses the word east, what you discover in every case that I'm aware of is east always refers to Babylon. And for example, we don't have time. I wish we had time to look at all these verses, but I'll just give them to people so they can look at them on their own. Genesis 2:8 indicates that the Garden of Eden was in the east. Genesis 2 verse 14 tells us that the Garden of Eden was located between the Euphrates and the Tigris, which is basically modern-day Babylon or modern-day Iraq.
Yes.
I don't know how much the floodwaters altered the topography of the world, but assuming that it's the same Euphrates and Tigris that I know of today, that's where the Garden of Eden probably was, in that general part of the world. And the listeners might want to jot down Genesis 11 and verse 2, because the Tower of Babel, or Babel, stood in the land of Shinar. Shinar is a Hebrew word. The Greek word is Mesopotamia, between the rivers. Meso means between, and you recognize the word Potomac, as in river. We have a famous river in America called the Potomac. So Potamia means rivers. So Mesopotamia means between the rivers. Shinar is that same area. That's where the Tower of Babel stood. And Genesis 11 verse 2 locates that part, calls that part of the world the east.
Yes.
So you've got these magi coming from Babylon following a star. Now, have you ever asked yourself why these folks were following a star? This is great. This is why I had folks turn to Numbers 24:17. It's exciting to me to watch the whole Bible come together.
It is. It is. Numbers 24:17. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth from Jacob. A scepter shall rise from Israel, and shall crush through the forehead of Moab, and tear down all the sons of Sheth.
Now this is Balaam's oracles, and you might remember from the book of Numbers that the nation of Israel was traveling around the Transjordan trying to enter Canaan, and Balak, the king of Moab, didn't like these Hebrews coming into his territory, so he hired Balaam to curse Israel. He paid him off to do this.
Right.
The problem is Israel has a covenant from God. So every time he blessed Israel, tried to curse Israel, he ended up blessing Israel. And he does this through 4 oracles, which are recorded in Numbers 23 and 24. And every time it says in here, and he picked up his oracle and he said, that's a new oracle. And then he makes a prophecy in the 4th oracle about a star coming forth from Jacob.
Yeah.
Now, Jacob is Israel, right?
Yes.
Because to be a Jew, you have to be a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I think it even says Israel there in the text. And it talks about a scepter coming forth. And so this is why these wise men from the east, Babylon, were following this star at this time in history. Now let me throw in something else that's very interesting. Where do you think Balaam lived? Where was his home residence? Where did he come from? And if you read Deuteronomy 23 and verse 4, it tells you exactly where this man Balaam, who had this prophecy, resided.
Let's see where he came from. Deuteronomy 23 verse 4. Because they did not meet you with food and water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor, and where was he from? From Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you.
Yeah.
Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamia. So Balaam, who connected the coming of the Jewish Messiah with a star, resided in Mesopotamia, or Iraq, or the Babylon area, which is where these wise men were coming from. So what I think is these wise men are called wise men because they had access to Balaam's prophecies, and they were following the star like the scripture told them to do. And it's a rebuke to the Hebrew people in the 1st century because here are these Gentiles in Babylon, a place of infamy, where the Tower of Babel was, where the children of Israel were taken into captivity. They've got prophecy figured out. They know when the Messiah is going to show up, and God's chosen people of a fuller record don't know. And so that's why they're following this star. And you don't really know that until you read his oracle and remember that he's a resident of Mesopotamia.
It's amazing.
Now, let's do a little pop quiz. Can you think of another Hebrew prophet that made a lot of messianic prophecies from Mesopotamia, this one being a Jew?
Let's see. I think you might be doing a series right now on Sunday morning about that person.
That's right. We're studying the book of Daniel. Daniel 1 and verse 2, we don't have to read it, but the children of Israel were taken to Shinar, which is this area where these wise men came from. And Daniel gave very specific prophecies about the timing of when the Messiah would show up in what's called the prophecy of the 70 weeks. We won't read it, but people might want to jot down Daniel 9 verse 25 because it gives you the exact day that the Messiah would present his messianic credentials to the nation in what's called the triumphal entry. And this is why you have people like Anna and Simeon in Luke 2 waiting for the Messiah. There's a remnant of people that understand the Messiah is going to be born soon because Daniel's clock is ticking. And Daniel, who had these prophecies, was promoted by Nebuchadnezzar into the ranks of the Magi.
Yes.
So can you read Daniel 2, verse 48? This was right after Daniel successfully interpreted the giant statue. He gave the revelation of it and the interpretation to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, as he promised, rewarded Daniel. Daniel 2:48.
Daniel 2:48. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon.
Yeah, and earlier in the chapter it mentions magicians, which is another way of saying magi. So here we are 6 centuries before the time of Christ, and you have Daniel, who's given all these messianic prophecies, promoted into the ranks of the Magi. So 600 years pass, and what do these Magi have in Babylon? They have Balaam's prophecies, I believe, and they also have Daniel's specific prophecies, and they put 2 and 2 together. They connected this strange star that they saw with the specific messianic timetable that Daniel would give later on in the book, and that's why they're following this star at a particular time in history.
I'm not sure that we often really think about this verse we just read, that Daniel had an influence amongst the wise men of Babylon, as you're saying, that transcended the ages down to the time of Christ. It's fascinating.
That shows you that God can take a godly person and use them in pagan life.
Absolutely.
To influence these pagans for good. I happen to think these Magi were believers, because I can't really understand why they would follow a star and make a 350-mile voyage if they didn't believe in the Messiah. And so the pagans have it figured out. But God's chosen people, the Hebrews in the first century, don't have it figured out, even though they had a fuller revelation in terms of messianic prophecy. So if you're joining us here for the first time, we're talking about Christmas, but we're primarily building our case from the Old Testament. And we've just looked at 2 major prophecies, Genesis 3, verse 15, and then also Numbers 24, verse 17, where God is revealing details about the birth of Jesus thousands of years in advance. In the case of Genesis 3, verse 15, that would go all the way back to Eden. And in the case of Numbers 24:17, that would go all the way back to the time of the Exodus, about 1,500 years before the time of Christ. So God is busy revealing all of these things, and He's moving His hand in history later on to fulfill His word. I mean, I don't think we're getting this understanding with our Christmas cards.
No, I don't think so.
I think your average person looks at the wise men following a star and they don't really connect the dots. But the Bible is so rich when you just allow it to speak.
Amen.
Well, let's move on to our third one. This is a famous one. A lot of people will recognize this. This comes from Isaiah 7, verses 13 and 14. This is on a lot of Christmas cards as well. Now, keep in mind, this prophecy was given 700 years before Christ ever showed up. I mean, 700 years is a long time.
I can't really even imagine what that is.
America's only been here for, 239, 240 years? And here we're talking about prophecies more than double the size of America. And so what is God revealed to the prophet Isaiah 7 centuries before the time of Christ?
Isaiah 7, verses 13 and 14. Then he said, "Listen now, O house of David. Is it too slight a thing for you to try the patience of men, that you will try the patience of my God as well? Therefore the Lord Himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child, and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel."
So the listeners will recognize that verse. That's a famous Christmas verse. Now, there are 3 objections that liberals give, because the liberal mind can't handle, as Jack Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. They can't handle this idea that particularly if you reject Christ, that the life of Christ is predicted in this manner.
Right.
So here are their three objections, and we'll just go through these very fast. Number one, they say Isaiah 7, verses 13 and 14 is not talking about the virgin birth of Christ, because if it was talking about the virgin birth of Christ, it would use the Hebrew word betulah, if I'm pronouncing that right. And it doesn't use that word, it uses the word alma. Alma means a young woman of marriageable age. It doesn't necessarily refer to a virgin, they tell us. So if Isaiah was trying to tell us about the virgin birth of Christ, it would use a different word. I would encourage people to look at Joel 1 and verse 8. Why don't you go ahead and read that?
Let me read that.
Joel 1 verse 8.
Now, Joel 1:8. Wail like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the bridegroom of her youth.
Now there it's talking about a widow. And when it translates it virgin, I believe it's the word betulah. So therefore, betulah doesn't always mean virgin. So the fact of the matter is the Hebrews had no specific word for a virgin. And I was listening to Dennis Prager, who's a Jewish commentator, and I enjoy his show. I agree with his politics and things, probably because we're reading the same Old Testament, so we have the same worldview. But I remember him sort of ridiculing people that believe that Isaiah 7 verses 13 and 14, is talking about the virgin birth of Christ, and his argument was it would have used this other word, betulah. But the problem is that word in and of itself doesn't always mean virgin. It can mean a widow, and we saw that very clearly in Joel 1 and verse 8. The second argument people use is this word alma does not mean virgin. This word simply means a young woman of marriageable age. As I said before, Isaiah had to use alma because the Hebrews had no word for virgin. And Arnold Fruchtenbaum does a word study in his book Messianic Christology. And I don't know if we need to read this whole quote, but he gives the 6 other uses of alma in the Old Testament. Genesis 24:43. Genesis 24:43. Exodus 2 and verse 8. I think I'm missing one there somewhere. Psalm 68:25. Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 3. Song of Songs, chapter 6, verse 8. And Proverbs 30, verses 18 and 19. Did I forget one there?
One more down there, Isaiah 7:14.
Yeah, which is the one we are in.
One we're looking at.
But he says, and as you study the context of all these 6 other usages, like they talk about maidens in the king's court, and things that one of them is talking about, I believe, Rebecca. All of them easily can refer to virgins. So it's within the semantic range of that word alma to mean a virgin. So yes, the dictionary definition of the word doesn't say virgin, but when you actually study the usages, 6 other usages outside of Isaiah 7 verses 13 and 14, it could all mean virgin.
Yes.
And so Arnold Fruchtenbaum asks this question: since all the other above 6 verses mean a virgin, what reason is there for making Isaiah 7 verse 14 the only exception?
Right.
Beyond that, we have something called the Septuagint. Sometimes it's called the LXX after the Roman numeral 70, because according to tradition, the Old Testament, what we call Hebrew Bible, was translated into Greek, according to legend, by 70 scholars in 70 days, because they were trying to make Hebrew Bible readable to the common person, because the world at that time spoke Greek because of the influence of Alexander the Great in the intertestamental period. So what people need to understand is 200 years before Jesus walked this planet, there was a Greek translation of Hebrew Bible.
Yes.
Now, we might ask the question, well, what word did the LXX translators use when they translated Isaiah 7, verse 14, and they translated that word Alma? You know what word they used? Parthenos.
Parthenos.
Parthenos in Greek is a technical word, which is a word that always means the same thing everywhere it's used. It always means virgin.
Yeah.
So those scholars believe that Isaiah 7, verse 14 was talking about the virgin birth of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
And beyond that, when you go into the New Testament and you read Matthew 1:23, which is a translation of Isaiah 7:14 into Greek, why don't you go ahead and read that to us?
Sure. Matthew 1:23, Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us.
So Matthew, when he wrote under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and used Greek, what word did he use when he translated Alma? He used Parthenos. Yeah. So under divine authority, Alma in that context in Isaiah 7:14, based on the New Testament, based on the Septuagint, means a virgin.
Right.
So all of this talk about how it really doesn't mean virgin, to me is just silly talk.
It is.
It does mean virgin, and if the Hebrews had a more precise word that always mean virgin, like the Greek language has.
Right.
You know, Greek is a more specific language. There's 4 words for love in Greek. We have 1 word for love in English. They would have used that word.
It sort of makes you think that God knew what he was doing when he had the New Testament written in Greek. You know, the fullness of time. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. It's like God anticipated these objections people would give to his word. So we're confident as we sit here this afternoon that Isaiah 7:14 is a prophecy about the virgin birth of Christ. Yes. One more argument liberals use is they say, well, you know, when you read Isaiah 7, it's talking about a crisis that King Ahaz was facing. And so, since this dealt with him specifically, how could this be a prophecy 700 years into the future about the virgin birth of Christ? And what people need to understand is, as you study Isaiah 7, there's 2 crises happening. One is to Ahaz, because he's being surrounded by Rezin of Aram and Pekah, the son of Remaliah. 2 kings are coming against him. But down in verse 2, it says, when it was reported to the house of David. So crisis A is what Ahaz was facing, a king, a Jewish king, Hebrew king. And then crisis B is what the Davidic throne is facing. So what you'll discover in this chapter is both crises are addressed. Because what is spoken of in Isaiah 7 verse 2 is this son named Shear-Jashub. That's actually in verse 3. Shear-Jashub means a remnant will return. Can you read that to us? Isaiah 7 verse 3.
Let's see, there it is. Isaiah 7:3. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out now to meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear-Jashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field.
So he has this kid come with him, and the kid's name means Shear-Jashub, a remnant will return. That's the prophecy that deals with Ahaz. Then he begins to deal with the crisis to the Davidic throne. And Isaiah gives a prophecy in verses 13 and 14 about how the Davidic throne is not going to go out of existence. Because that Davidic throne, some centuries down the road, is that lineage from the Davidic throne is going to be used to begat who? A coming Messiah.
Yes.
Now, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, in his book Messianic Christology, shows grammatically that the Hebrew word for you, second person pronoun, is singular all the way through this chapter, as it's dealing with the crisis to Ahaz. Then suddenly, as you get to verses 13 and 14, it shifts from singular to plural.
Interesting.
Because it's speaking of the crisis of the Davidic throne as a whole for the nation. And then once you get outside of verse 14 and move into verse 15, the personal pronoun you, second person pronoun you, switches right back to the singular.
Mm-hmm.
Now, words mean things.
They do.
And so I think what he's doing in verses 13 and 14 is he's no longer dealing with the immediate crisis of Ahaz.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the prophecy related to Shir Jasub was about.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's dealing with the long-term threat to the Davidic throne. And what he's saying is the Davidic throne is not going to go out of existence because of this international crisis.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lineage leading to the birth of the Messiah. So that Davidic lineage is going to be kept intact until the birth of that Messiah. That's what's happening here.
Wow.
You want to read that quote by Arnold Fruchtenbaum?
Sure.
It's page 36, if I've got the
Correct.
page number
36
right.
in Messianic Christology.
Yeah.
He writes, in verse 13, Isaiah turns from addressing Ahaz as an individual and addresses the entire house of David. The English language does not distinguish between you addressed to one person and you addressed to many people. In Hebrew, there is a difference, and there is a clear change between the singular you of verses 9, 11, 16, and 17, and the plural you of verses 13 and 14. The sign, therefore, is not just for Ahaz, but for the whole house of David. This becomes clearer if we state the passage again with the singular and plural words indicated. And then you want me to read that?
Yeah, please. That'd be good.
All right. He says, Isaiah 7:9, he's reading, he says, and the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you, singular, will not believe, you, singular, surely shall not last. Verse 10. Then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, verse 11, ask a sign for yourself, singular, from the Lord your God. Make it deep as Sheol or high as heaven. Verse 12. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. Verse 13. Then the Lord said, listen now, O house of David. Is it too slight a thing for you, plural, to try the patience of men, that you, plural, will try the patience of my God as well? Verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you, plural, a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. Verse 15. He will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. Verse 16. For before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you, singular, dread will be forsaken. Verse 17. The Lord will bring you, singular, on your people. The Lord will bring on you, singular, on your people and on your father's house, such days as have never come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria.
So verses 9, 11, 16, and 17, singular, you. You get into verses 13 and 14, which is right there in the middle. It switches from singular to plural.
Yes.
Why is that? Because he's no longer dealing with the crisis to Ahaz. He's dealing with the crisis to the Davidic throne. So all of these arguments that people use, they should have used Betula. That argument doesn't work. Alma doesn't mean virgin. That argument doesn't work. And the crisis is nothing related to Jesus. It's related only to Ahaz. That argument doesn't work either.
Yeah.
So as God is my witness, and I've studied the Bible for a long time, I don't claim to know everything about it, but the absolute strongest conviction from the bottom of my heart is Isaiah 7, verses 13 and 14, is a prophecy about the virgin birth of Christ. I have no equivocation about that whatsoever. Do we have time for one more?
I hope so.
I hope so. People would get mad at us if we left this one out.
I think so.
So we got to do this one real fast, and we're going to get to folks' questions. Can you turn to Micah? Now remember, Micah is a contemporary of Isaiah.
Yes.
So they're both prophesying around the same time, about 7 centuries before the birth of Christ. So this is another prophecy 7 centuries in advance. And this one shows up on a lot of our Christmas cards as well. Micah 5 and verse 2.
All right, Micah 5:2. But as for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, From you one will go forth from me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity.
So, is there any doubt here that this is speaking of the Messiah? I don't think there's any doubt, because it says, his goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Hebrew word olam.
Mm-hmm.
Olam means forever.
Forever. Mm-hmm.
And that's a word used to describe God himself.
Yes.
In fact, can you read Psalm 90, verse 2, where olam is also used?
Yes, Psalm 90, verse 2. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God.
So, God is from olam to olam.
Olam to olam. Mm-hmm.
And can you read Fruchtenbaum's quote there from Messianic Christology related to olam?
Sure, this is from page 64 in Messianic Christology. As regards his human origin, he is to be born in Bethlehem. But regarding his divine origin, he is said to be from long ago, from the days of eternity. The Hebrew words for from long ago, from the days of eternity, are the strongest Hebrew words ever used for eternity past. They are used of God the Father in Psalm 90, verse 2, which we just read. What is true of God the Father is also said to be true of this one who is to be born in Bethlehem.
So there's no doubt this is the Messiah.
Absolutely.
But what does it say here? But as for you, Bethlehem,
Mm-hmm.
Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be the ruler of Israel. What is this exactly saying? This is pinpointing 700 years in advance. Number one, the nation that the Messiah will come from,
Mm-hmm.
because Judah is within the nation of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, it's giving the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Now remember, the nation of Israel had 12 tribes.
Right.
And it's pinpointing one of the 12,
Yes.
the tribe of
Judah.
Judah,
Mm-hmm.
being the tribe. Now why did the Messiah have to come forth from Judah? Why not another tribe? Because of Messianic prophecy.
Yes.
Can you read Genesis 49, verse 10?
Yes, sir. Genesis 49:10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples.
This is what Jacob said just before he died as he's blessing his sons.
Yes.
He gets to Judah. Remember, his 12 sons would be the progenitors of the 12 tribes.
Yes.
He gets to one of his sons and he said, the ruler is coming from your tribe.
Yep.
So Micah picks up on that and says the Messiah is going to come from the tribe of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
This is why Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Yes.
Can you read that? Revelation 5 and verse 5? Do you have
Revelation 5:5. And one of the elders said to me, Stop weeping. Behold, the Lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has overcome so as to open the book and its 7 seals.
So the Messiah has to be born from the tribe of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
So what is being said here? Micah, 500 years in advance, is identifying the nation,
Yeah.
the tribe. Now, would that be enough? That would be enough for me. God says, let me take you one step further. I'm going to give you the city within the tribe.
That's
and
right.
what does it say here? But as for you, Bethlehem,
Mm-hmm.
Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah. So all of the cities in that particular tribal area, he pinpoints the exact city.
Yes.
Now, what's the city? Bethlehem. That is a mind blower, because you would think the Messiah would come from Jerusalem,
Right.
given the prominence that Jerusalem plays in the Old Testament. And Micah says, no, he's not going to be born in Jerusalem.
Right.
He's going to be born in this little city, a fairly insignificant city,
Mm-hmm.
about 2 miles south of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Now, folks, this is 700 years before it happened.
Yeah.
And then he says something that blows my mind even further. He says, Bethlehem, Ephratah. Now, most people don't know this, but in the land of Israel, there's two Bethlehems. There's one up in the Galilee area, and there's another little tiny Bethlehem in the couple miles south of Jerusalem. And Micah says, oh, by the way, it's not going to be this Bethlehem up here. It's going to be this little one down here.
So he wasn't talking about Bethlehem, Pennsylvania either, was he? Oh, okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and read Fruchtenbaum's quote here from Messianic Christology, distinguishing Bethlehem Ephratah from the Bethlehem in Galilee.
All right, this would be page 64 of Messianic Christology. And Arnold Fruchtenbaum writes, as regards, wait, I'm in the wrong one. Let me come back down. It's still page 64. Messiah is to be born not in Jerusalem, as might have been expected, but in Bethlehem. This is Bethlehem Ephrathah, as distinguished from another Bethlehem in Galilee. This Bethlehem is the Bethlehem of David and of Judah, situated south of Jerusalem.
I'll give you the tribe. I'll give you the city. By the way, it's not the city you're thinking of. It's not Jerusalem. It's Bethlehem. And by the way, just to be very clear, it's not the Bethlehem up in Galilee. It's the Bethlehem down here. 700 years in advance, that type of detail is given. That's why when Herod was jealous, when the Magi came to worship the king, he went and turned to his guys and said, where's the king going to be born? We don't have to read it, but it's in Matthew 2, verses 4 through 6. They all said Bethlehem because they knew the Word of God.
Yes.
And I just want people to understand what the Holy Spirit has done here with this prophecy. It would be like saying, here's the United States of America with 50 states. And then the Holy Spirit identifies America as the place of the Messiah. Then he identifies the state that he'll come from.
Which would be Texas.
Well, of course, it would be Texas, the Lone Star State. Yes. Then he identifies the county. And then within the county, he identifies the city. Now, sometimes in the United States, we have two cities that have the same name. I don't know if I can think of a city in Texas, two cities in Texas with the same name, but I travel to Duluth a lot in Minnesota. I used to think that was the only Duluth in the country, but there's another Duluth elsewhere. So it's like saying not the Duluth over here that you're used to, it's a different Duluth. And that's what the Holy Spirit has done here with this prophecy. And you know,
wow.
I get so excited about this. It just makes it just gives me goosebumps to think about how much detail God has given us about His Word.
Yes.
And you know, when we celebrate Christmas, these are the things I think we ought to be thinking about.
Amen.
And we've only looked at 4. Genesis 3:15, which is an early testimony about His virgin birth. We looked at Numbers 24:17, which analogizes the coming of Christ to a star. We looked at Isaiah 13 and 14, which is a clearer prophecy about the virgin birth of Christ.
Yes.
And then we look at Micah 5 and verse 2, which pinpoints the exact country, tribe, and city the Messiah is going to be born in.
Wow.
And we don't think God loves us and cares about us to give us this kind of information to let us all know exactly who this man Jesus is.
And I think He welcomes legitimate seekers, those that have questions, and that's why He's put all that there. That if you come with an open mind to the Scriptures, God has answers for you.
And I love that Christmas card or bumper sticker. It says, "Wise men still seek Him."
Yes.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and I need you to talk for a couple seconds, Jim. Because
all right, I can do that.
I'm going to kind of go through my papers here, and I was handed a stack of questions, which, here they are, beneath me. On the floor. Why don't you give some insights, and I'll see if we can read through a few questions.
Well, one thing that I did want to bring up is that when we were talking about the Greek word that was translated virgin, it's interesting when you come over to Matthew 1:16, when it's listing the genealogy there. The standard method of genealogy is to say, for example, in verse 16, Jacob was the father of Joseph. You see this same grammatical format all the way from the beginning of the chapter. But when you come down here to right before Jesus, he says, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. And then you have something very interesting grammatically happen here. Because it stops right there with Joseph. It ends Joseph's line right there, and it says, by whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. Now, this is another instance where if you're looking at only the English,
Yes.
you miss this entirely, because the tendency would be to say, oh, by whom is referencing Joseph, her husband. But actually in the Greek, this is an expression that is feminine. It's referring directly back to Mary. So when it says by whom Jesus was born, it's not referencing Joseph whatsoever. It's directly referencing Mary. And that's not by accident that God put that in there.
Right.
I think this is a very strong support for the whole idea of the virgin birth once again. Matthew, having already addressed that earlier. So there it is.
And it's these nuances of the languages that help us with this.
It is.
Like the nuance that we were talking about earlier, the switch from the singular to the plural back
Right.
to the singular.
Right.
Arnold Fruchtenbaum even says this in the excerpt that you read, that you wouldn't be able to discern that in English.
Right.
You would only be able to discern it in the Hebrew.
Yes.
And this is why original languages, bringing the original languages into the pulpit when they're relevant,
Yes.
is very important, because a lot of people have this idea that, well, I don't need the original languages, and I don't need to study under someone that knows the original languages.
Right.
And it's sort of like watching a movie. Do you want to watch it in black and white, or do you want to watch it in color? It's the exact same movie. You'll get the same message, but some of these nuanced details that to me are very exciting, you can't come by unless you become a student of the original languages.
Right.
And, I went through seminary. I don't know everything there is to know about Hebrew and Greek, but what little I know, I'm appreciative of. And I
Yes.
know that you
Yes.
feel the same way in
Absolutely.
your seminary training.
Absolutely.
And you've actually taught at the seminary level
Right.
original languages, so this is obviously a passion of yours.
It is, and one thing I want to convey to people is that we're not saying that you have to be a scholar. You don't have to be a Hebrew and a Greek scholar, but what you can do is learn how to use the tools that are available to you, and that'll help you tremendously. And of course, there are all kinds of tools available.
What's sort of sad is all these tools are available to us. It's almost like our level of biblical understanding is perhaps at the lowest level it's ever been. So the more God gives us, the less we use it.
That's true.
And, a lot of people just aren't accustomed to coming to church to learn something.
Right.
I saw a sign for a church the other day. It almost broke my heart. It says, "You're done in 30 minutes," sort of thing. And it's like they're trying to get people to come by promising them that they're not going to do any mental work.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, folks, if you really want to grow as a Christian, you have to do some mental work.
Yes.
And that's kind of the thing.
Yes.
And it's rewarding to do it.
Absolutely.
So we would encourage you, even if you don't have a chance to learn any of the original languages, to try to study under someone that knows something about the
That's
original
right.
languages. And watch the movie in color rather than black and white. Question, and I'm going to throw this to you because I can't answer it.
Oh boy, here we go.
The star that the Magi were following, was it really a star or a shining angel? The Greek Orthodox Church claims it was a shining angel. I'll give you my take on it real quick. Angelos is a Greek word that Matthew and others know how to use, and it doesn't say angelos there. So I wasn't there, but I kind of have a tendency to think it was not an angel. I just think it was some strange meteorological phenomenon in the sky that was abnormal. And because it appeared at a particular time in history, the Magi, who had Balaam's prophecies and Daniel's prophecies and knew the time that they were in, the Messianic times, could connect the dots. But do you have any thoughts on, was this an angel, a star?
Well, I would basically agree with what you just said. I mean, I might be willing to entertain the idea that in some way, shape, or form, it may even have been some representation of the Shekinah glory of God, perhaps. But the bottom line is the Scriptures don't tell us. So anything that we try to formulate in terms of a dogma on that, we're just barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah. We can't be dogmatic about things the Bible's not
Absolutely
dogmatic
not.
on.
Whatever the bottom line is this: whatever it was, they saw it to be a fulfillment of prophecy, and that brought them to Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. One person writes, is Isaiah 7:14 a near prophecy or a far prophecy? And I think we've sort of answered that.
I think so too.
A lot of people will take Isaiah 7:14 as both a near and a far prophecy. Like it's talking about something going on in Ahaz's day, but it's also talking about something in the distant future. I'm not really of that persuasion because of the principle of single meaning.
Right.
An ancient hermeneutical principle that I think is valid. What I think is the surrounding chapter, the information in the chapter, is related to Ahaz. But when you get to the verses 13 and 14, it's a singular prophecy pointing out to the future about the birth of Jesus Christ. Right. One thing we didn't mention is Isaiah 7 and verse 14 talks about it being a sign. Now, if this is just talking about something naturalistic in Ahaz's day, how could that be a sign?
Right.
The expression sign is speaking of a miracle,
yes,
which I think is pointing to the virgin birth of Christ.
Absolutely. It has to be something out of the ordinary.
Out of the ordinary. And then another individual, and I appreciate it, he just quoted a verse to us, Isaiah 9, verse 6, "For unto us a child is born, a son is given, the government shall be on his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." He asks, is this referring to Jesus? I believe that it is referring to Jesus because it talks about him ruling the world in millennial fashion. He asks, if so, does this title Everlasting Father refer to Jesus as well? And I think a lot of that is the mystery of the Trinity. We worship one God, but we believe that he's expressed himself in three separate personages, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So sometimes there can be a prophecy about Jesus, which can also take a title from God the Father. For example, in John 8:58, Jesus claims to be the great I am,
right,
which is a title of God, and he applies that to himself. It's a title of God that goes back to Exodus 3 and verse 14. So the mystery of the Trinity, I think, allows some of these titles to be shifted around. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, the Hebrew there is interesting because it actually, in the Hebrew, it says Father of Eternity.
Father of Eternity, okay.
Not Eternal Father, but Father of Eternity.
Interesting. So different nuance. And that's sort of another reason that Isaiah 7:14 is messianic. Because other parts of Isaiah, not too far down the road, this is from Isaiah 9, just 2 chapters later, is messianic. So I'm excited about Christmas.
Me too.
I'm excited about the Bible. I'm excited about what God is revealing. If people want to get into this subject of Messianic Christology, let me close by giving you some resources that I think will be very helpful to you. I recommend Arnold Fruchtenbaum's book, Messianic Christology. A lot of scholars today are denying messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. And if you're in that kind of environment where people are denying messianic prophecy, I had one scholar, in quotes, tell me there's only 2 messianic prophecies in the whole Old Testament, which to me is ludicrous. Because it makes Christ's New Testament statements about being the theme of Hebrew Bible nonsensical. I recommend the book by Michael Rydelnik, and maybe one of our staff can Google that title. I believe it's called Messianic Hope. Messianic Hope by Michael Rydelnik is sort of a response to these scholars that are denying messianic prophecy, even in our evangelical schools. And if you're looking for a good New Testament commentary on Matthew that gives you the Christmas story, I recommend the Matthew commentary by Dr. Stanley Toussaint, who was my professor, and his commentary, I believe, is called Behold the King. Behold the King. I would encourage folks to like us on Facebook, to set your account up so you can receive word of our notifications when we're going to be doing these live feeds. We're going to try to do these every Friday. The next 2 Fridays coming up, our office is closed, unfortunately, so we won't be here, but we'll see everybody in the year 2017, where we're going to get right back into the subject of pastoral philosophy with the Christmas season and so forth behind us. And, I just kind of feel the obligation, as we've talked about Jesus, there could be people out there listening that don't have any relationship with the God that made them, and we believe that all of these things point towards the gospel.
Amen.
God loved us so much that he bridged heaven and earth to pay a sin debt we could never pay.
Amen.
And all of this prophecy is interesting, but it all points to Christ and what he did. And if we simply receive by faith, which means trust, his work as a free gift, we're given the gift of eternal life. And I would tell folks, don't hold out for a better deal. You're not going to get a better one than this.
What a great Christmas gift.
To be born spiritually,
spiritually.
in the season that we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. So the Rydelnik book, Messianic Hope, is helpful. The Toussaint book, Behold the King, the Matthew commentary, is helpful. The Arnold Fruchtenbaum book, Messianic Christology, is helpful. I have a feeling that I'm leaving something out. Help me here if I'm forgetting something. Can you think of anything?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. Well, we just encourage people to have a tremendous Christmas, remembering that he is the reason for the season.
Right.
And this is Dr. Andy Woods and Dr. Jim McGowan signing off on our pastor's perspective. And we'll see y'all in the year 2017.
God bless.
God bless you.